Who is leading the EV revolution?
Bellwether of the Indian automobile industry, Tata Motors. Look at the automobile industry in India today.
After roti, kapda and makan, the next thing you need is a car.
Maruti Suzuki. I think it's one of your favorite stocks of all time.
Suzuki Motors went ahead and developed products specifically for the Indian market.
So Mahindra Racing is one of the founding members of Formula E.
And all of that credit goes to Anand Mahindra.
Elon Musk and Tesla can take a lot of credit for shifting us away from this mentality of gasoline cars.
The auto industry has understood the trick to boost sales.
Although I'll say one thing though, I think MRF's greatest contribution to India has been to sponsor Sachin's bat.
Yeah, absolutely.
So welcome to the 7th episode of our Indian Market Stories series. Thanks a lot for being here and sharing your wisdom with us. We've got a really engaging and interesting topic to discuss today: the Indian automobile industry, one of the sunrise industries of the Indian economic story, and very excited to discuss what this means for Indian investors and how they can play this space and make the right decisions.
Varun, coming on this podcast is the highlight of my week, and clearly I enjoy it. We're looking at a very interesting topic which has got a lot of nuances and a great deal of history, and its contribution to the economy is just phenomenal.
Okay, well, I think we're talking about a really interesting topic today, the automobile industry in India, and I think it's a really pertinent time to be talking about this subject as well. We've had the figures for FY23 and what the total sales were, and some really interesting takeaways. I think the overall sales number is up by 20%. The three-wheeler sales are up 80%. Passenger vehicle sales are up about 20% or so, and two-wheeler sales are also up in about the 20% range, although tractor sales are only up 7%, as you can see. But I think the automobile industry is a really interesting industry for us to explore because it's one of the key growth engines for the economy.
Absolutely, and for a developing nation like ours, we are really fortunate to have this kind of a vibrant auto industry. And I think a lot of it has to do with government policies which have been followed well before 1991 also, when the liberalization program started. And I was always very skeptical of the licensing policies of the government and how they prevented imports from coming in. And that may have affected many other industries, but the fact that we could not import cars into India has been very, very beneficial for the auto industry. That's how we are amongst the 4 or 5 countries in the world which has a very strong ecosystem of auto ancillaries as well as automobile manufacturing across all segments within the auto industry. So I would give a lot of credit to governments to have created such a vibrant and dynamic auto industry in India. And we can certainly talk about the history because there are a few interesting nuggets.
Yeah. I mean, the auto industry has grown fantastically, both in terms of its breadth and its depth. I think 30-40 years ago, the only thing you could get was the Fiat, and then you had to wait for the Fiat. And if you were really rich and connected and a politician, you got an ambassador, and really that was it. But now everybody's got a Merc, everybody's got a BM, and of course, most people have Marutis. So what's the journey been like for the auto industry in India?
So the first automobile plants were set up in the 1940s, first by General Motors and by Ford, but then they shut down immediately thereafter. And the first homegrown auto company was Hindustan Motors. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist just now. They were the manufacturer of the iconic Ambassador. They came into existence in 1942, and then 1948 we had Premier Automobiles. But these two companies were constrained by lack of technology. There were constraints on their capacity. But the inflection point for the auto industry was when Maruti Udyog, which was formed by Sanjay Gandhi, son of Indira Gandhi, he had a passion for cars and he set up Maruti, but that also he could not get the right technology. So he formed a joint venture with Suzuki Motors, and that's when the auto industry in India really took off, because Suzuki Motors brought in state-of-art technology, state-of-art models, beautiful looking cars. And clearly, I think the first Maruti 800 launch was with a great deal of fanfare. It had 4-5 years of booking, and there were huge premiums also. Car was costing 50,000, but you could earn a premium of almost 50,000 rupees on the car if you had an allotment letter. So the industry started from there, and because Suzuki Motors came to India from Japan, they got a lot of the Japanese auto ancillaries also into India, and they got Indian industrialists to set up joint ventures with those auto ancillary companies from Japan, and that's how the entire production, backward integration, the indigenization program started from that point on. And the rest is history. I think we have a lot to thank the government and Suzuki Motors for developing the auto industry in India.
Yeah, and it's what I always think about is I think I look at the automobile industry in India today, and I think there's a really strong presence of Japanese manufacturers. I think started by Suzuki, but maybe there's some deeper, more fundamental reasons to that. If you think about Japan post World War II, they were also an economy of scarcity. High efficiency, low construction cost was really important for them to manufacture cars efficiently. And for India, which has never really had any hydrocarbons, high efficiency, low cost car has always been of much more importance versus the American model where you have low efficiency cars, cars that have a lot of power but they burn a lot of fuel. But it's grown, that growth has been outstanding, and I think it's really matched the income growth of India over the last 30-40 years.
Absolutely. I think owning a car has more than transportation, has got aspirational value. And if you own a car, then you really arrived. And it's something which a lot of users feel very passionate about. I think we have this saying that after roti, kapda and makan, the next thing you need is a car.
Yeah.
So that's where the Indian auto industry fits in. And I think every Indian citizen has a life cycle. He starts with a cycle, actual cycle, gets onto a motorcycle. His dream is a car. Then he gets into the car, and then he wants a bigger and bigger car. So that's the ultimate destination for a lot of consumers. And I think the Indian auto industry offers some product at every price point for every user. And I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I guess the other thing to note is, you touched on this whole aspirational value of a car, because India is really an aspirational country. It's really interesting to see if, as you can see, the volume growth as well in the number of cars being manufactured and sold over the last 20-30 years has shown some really solid, consistent growth. And I think that's reflected in some of the listed companies as well that have been great wealth creators.
You hit the nail on the head. When I said the way the government has promoted the auto industry by not allowing imports first and by focusing and promoting indigenous development, it has created so many wealth companies which have created a lot of wealth. Starting with Maruti, there's Mahindra Mahindra, there's Tata Motors, and there's a whole host of auto ancillary companies also. Bharat Forge comes to mind.
Amaraja Batteries, Exide.
That's right. And the tire companies, Apollo Tires, MRF, I think the entire transportation industry has benefited because of indigenous automobile production.
Yeah. Although I'll say one thing though, I think MRF's greatest contribution to India has been to sponsor Sachin's bat.
Yeah, absolutely.
that's the most valuable.
That's another story. When India didn't have pace bowlers, that's when MRF came in and set up the Indian Pace Academy, and now we have a bountiful. We are spoiled for choice when it comes to fast bowlers. So that's one I think added benefit of having a vibrant auto industry.
Great. The presence of cricket in Indian life is never too far away.
Absolutely, and auto companies have been sponsoring cricketing events as well.
Yep.
And they have given great deal of support to Indian cricketers as well.
Yeah, but I think the industries are another inflection point. Now, if you look over the last 50-60 years, not just in India, globally, auto manufacturing has been driven by gasoline cars. But I think Elon Musk and Tesla can take a lot of credit for shifting us away from this mentality of gasoline cars over to EV cars. And I'll throw out some really important names. Tesla is one of them, but there's a lot of really important companies in China, BYD in particular, that are driving this EV transformation. And at the other end of the spectrum, I guess from the Japanese side of things, they're investing very heavily into hydrogen technology. So it seems almost like the automobile industry for passenger vehicles, commercial vehicles, and two-wheelers as well is at the cusp of a revolutionary shift from fossil fuel powered vehicles to EVs and maybe even hydrogen.
Yeah, that's right. There's a great deal of disruption taking place in the industry. And whatever disruption is taking place is very, very positive for India, because we are highly dependent on crude oil and for petroleum products, therefore. And if we have lower oil prices because of a global shift towards EV, then that will make our economy much stronger and improve the balance of payments, and the current account deficit problems also may get eased if oil prices are within control or actually come down. So I'm really tracking this growth of EV industry, the growth of alternate energy, how it is shaping up within India, globally as well, because they're all interconnected.
Yeah, I wouldn't expect though that even however strong the shift to EVs or renewable energy becomes, I would not expect the oil price to soften, because I think even if you've seen in the news recently, every time demand comes down for fossil fuels, because of the cartelized nature of fossil fuel production, particularly by OPEC, they will always cut production, because every oil economy, they structure their national budget around the price of oil. They have a target revenue that they want to hit, and only at that target revenue do they have a current account surplus. So every time the price of oil falls, as it has been doing in the last couple of months, they'll respond with a production cut, as they have done most recently. So I would love to see a shift away from fossil fuels to renewable energy. I think it's positive for the Indian economy, it's positive for the world at large, it's positive for the environment, but I would not expect this to be accompanied by a cut in fossil fuel prices. That doesn't seem real
But
to
the
me.
question I want to ask you is that, do you think OPEC and OPEC Plus are now trying to target less volatility in oil prices and trying to keep the oil prices, crude oil prices, within a more narrow range? Which is great for everyone. I'm throwing that question to you.
I don't think that. I don't think that at all. I think they're perfectly happy with volatility, because they're the lowest cost producer. So for them, what their broader strategic play is they want to be the last man standing in oil, particularly Saudi Arabia. So every time there's volatility in oil prices, what happens is the smaller oil producers, so the shale oil producers in the US, in Canada, in the West generally, that rely on external capital financing, they suffer. And every time they suffer, they collapse, and they don't come back with as much strength. If you go back to, I think, 2015, 2016, there was this whole conversation around the shale oil boom. That's disappeared if you think about it.
Yeah,
so they're very happy to survive through volatility, because they have the strongest hand, because they know ultimately all that volatility will do is it'll strengthen their hand, it'll strengthen their share of the pie, and then the more of the pie they have, the more control they can have over the final oil price. So volatility is, I think, a negotiating tool for them rather than something that hurts them.
That's an interesting point. But another very important aspect which drives the auto industry, which we should discuss, is interest rates. Because globally, passenger vehicles are bought on EMI.
Yeah.
And interest rates, auto sales are very sensitive to interest rates.
Yeah.
And this recent upswing in interest rates, I think the numbers which you showed
Yeah.
just now, they have not yet impacted.
No, that's not true. As you can see, the cost of purchasing a new car, the rates on new as well as used car loans in the US especially have started spiking in the last couple of quarters. So these interest rate hikes are feeding into the cost of buying a car on finance. So although it hasn't really influenced automobile purchases, I think with the interest rate cycle being where it is, and with the expectation of continually higher interest rates because of inflation, I would expect for the cost of purchasing a car on finance to stay high.
That's true. I think that's going to be one of the kind of headwinds as far as the auto industry is concerned. In India as well, I think interest costs are going up. But in India, when it comes to overview of the auto industry, there is something very positive trend which is happening, which is that all the auto companies, they have now got a very exciting range of new models, and that is what's really driving their sales. And more importantly, again, the same aspirational aspect comes into play, and therefore they're able to sell cars which are at a higher value, which have got all the bells and whistles, bigger cars. Because the way they try and do it is that your EMI is going only a few hundred rupees. So why don't you buy this state-of-art new SUV or a new EV, and you can have the benefit of a much superior product
Yeah.
than what you are actually looking at buying.
It's that premiumization trend.
Yes, that's the right word.
Presumably driving better margins for the auto manufacturers.
Absolutely, I think because the higher the average selling price, the higher the margins which are there. And because a lot of new model sales are taking place, the discounting also is less. And I think the auto industry has understood the trick to boost sales is to keep on having a very high quantum, high velocity of new models, new variants coming in. And that's how they are keeping the user engaged. And also the average ownership in number of years is declining because new models are coming into play. So this is another fabulous trend. I mean, from a consumer point of view, you're again being tempted to buy new models, and it's going to burn your pocket. But from the auto industry point of view, I think it's a very, very sound and nice strategy to follow to boost their sales.
Yeah, and this trend towards new model launches isn't just with gasoline powered cars. I think particularly Tata and M&M, they've got a really robust plan to launch EVs and hybrids, and they've been investing very heavily into EV technology. And I guess just to maybe give a little interesting piece of information. Now, most of the automobile manufacturers globally, at least Tesla and BYD, they've invested very heavily into the battery platforms, which is the heart of an EV. They've invested in lithium-ion batteries that use the nickel-cobalt chemistry, and that offers superior performance in terms of energy density, and as a result, it offers superior performance in terms of range. But the cost of mining cobalt and nickel is very high, so they are more expensive as a result. But Tata and M&M in particular, because of the price sensitivity and the relatively low price point of the Indian auto industry, they've invested very heavily into lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry, which doesn't offer as high energy density on the batteries, but it's much more cost competitive. And
but can I share a secret with you? So I was speaking to somebody on the shop floor, kind of a middle-level manager at one of these EV manufacturing companies, because I was thinking of buying, my next car has to be a EV. I think we are all very ecologically sensitive in that manner. And he told me that all of the present EV manufacturing companies in India, be it the Tata or the Harrier or Mahindra Mahindra, they are still experimenting with technology. They do not have a stable state technology. Every year they try out something new, see what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and then it's like a 2 steps forward, 1 step backward kind of a strategy. So he was discouraging me from buying an EV at this point of time. He's saying that globally, let the technology stabilize. Like how we have a stable technology when it came to the fossil fuels, at some point of time we will have a stable technology when it comes to EV. And from a purchasing point of view, that's the right time to buy, because then you'd have the best product at the right price.
That's completely fair. And I'm not even necessarily convinced that EVs are the future of renewable mobility, because I think if we look at Reliance and Adani as well as the major Japanese manufacturers, they're investing very heavily into hydrogen. And just an interesting point to note, compressed hydrogen has 1.5 times the energy density of gasoline. But the big drawback of compressed hydrogen is that the actual compression technology, the tanks are very heavy. So the net performance of compressed hydrogen tends to be quite bad because of that extra weight. But ultimately, you're right. We'll have to wait and see how this technology evolves.
But I mean, the future is fantastic for the auto industry. And I think one gentleman, Nitin Gadkari, is making it even more rosy by setting up so many highways and roads. Because I think in India we don't have a driving culture, going from one city to another city, as is there in Europe, in China and in America, because you never had good roads. But now I think with better highways, easier connectivity, that will give a big incentive for car ownership as well. I mean, imagine you could take a car and drive from here to New Delhi. It's never been done in this country before, but with the new highways coming up, it could be a day's trip.
Yeah. Well, great times for passenger vehicle manufacturers. Yes. And I think
investors should look at it very, very closely. These are exciting times. But Varun, I think that from an investor's perspective, within the auto industry, the best space to be in is the passenger vehicle, not the two-wheelers, not the tractors, not so much the commercial vehicles. And two-wheelers, I think they're reaching maturity point. Commercial vehicle and tractors are cyclical in nature, but passenger vehicle sales are secular in nature. So that is where I think investors should focus on. You have 3 or 4 companies, but you have a whole host of auto ancillary companies as well. And thanks to indigenization program, most of India's auto ancillary industry is strongly focusing on exports as well.
Well, why don't we dig into some of that, and we'll go company by company and give investors a perspective on where they should be putting their money. Okay, let's talk about the leader in the Indian automobile segment, particularly for passenger vehicles, Maruti Suzuki. I think it's one of your favorite stocks of all time.
Absolutely. And I've been tracking this company right from IPO days. And I would say that Maruti Suzuki is India's shining example of foreign direct investment working for the country as well as the investor. And when Sanjay Gandhi gave the opportunity to Suzuki Motors to partner his fledgling company Maruti, I think Suzuki Motors took it with both hands. And full credit to them for pouring their soul into the company and bringing the best state-of-art products. Usually what happens is that when a foreign company comes to India, they put their second hand, the not so great products, but Suzuki Motors went ahead and developed products specifically for the Indian market, and it has paid very rich dividends for them. And Suzuki was the number 4 player in Japan, and when they came to India, the Indian subsidiary now is the largest in the Suzuki Motors ecosystem, and has created fantastic value for Suzuki Motors shareholders, for Maruti shareholders like us, for the country at large, and for the entire auto ecosystem, because they brought a lot of auto ancillaries also into India.
I think every Indian's first car is almost inevitably some sort of a Maruti.
Absolutely. I think at least from my generation onwards, my dad, I think first car was a Fiat, but my generation onwards, the first car has been a Maruti. And everybody has fond memories of the Maruti 800 and the other various models. And now I think the company's really got products across all segments, and all those products are market leaders within those segments. And they are continuously bringing new technology, new design, new products, new variants into the country. And that's really driving growth for Maruti Suzuki.
Yeah, I think one number that I saw is that only 3% of all Indian consumers actually own a passenger vehicle. And given that Maruti is the entry level passenger vehicle for most Indians, is it fair to expect that their sales will continue to grow at the rate at which it's been growing, as you can see, as more and more Indians hit the income threshold and are able to afford passenger vehicles?
Yes, I think so. And with all near 50% or thereabout market share right now, I think it's at 42% or so, keeps going up by 3-4 percentage points. Obviously, I think as the industry grows, it is going to be the market leader which will first of all drive the growth, as well as capture a larger pie of the rising sales or the incremental sales which take place over there. And Maruti has lagged in a couple of segments, like SUVs, was driven by Mahindra and some of the new generation auto companies which came to India. But it has quickly learned from its mistakes, and it has launched appropriate products then which have become extremely popular and market leaders, like the Grand Vitara is there, or some of the other SUVs. They become market leaders because although they were late, but the product is of such a nature that has been really appreciated by the consumer. So it's been a shining example of how auto company has created wealth. And not only that, I think there are certain nuances of Maruti which people do not know. One is the fact that it follows a very asset-light business model.
I think they have no debt on their books as well.
Of course, that goes without saying. But 2 or 3 interesting aspects about them is that Suzuki Motors then, once the capacity utilization was reaching peak level for Maruti, then Suzuki Motors came into India and set up a new plant in Gujarat. And that Gujarat plant has got an exclusive sales arrangement with Maruti only. So Maruti was saved the capital cost of setting up a new plant, and it's a very transparent pricing agreement between Suzuki Motors and Maruti Suzuki about how they will produce, and the Maruti Suzuki will sell those new models, and that's a new state-of-art plant, generated a lot of employment within Gujarat as well, and created more than adequate capacity for Maruti to grow. That's nuance number one. The second thing, what very few people know, is that Maruti has used its cash flow to buy huge parcels of land around major cities, around major consuming centers, and they are providing this land to their dealers on a kind of agreement or a rental basis, so that those dealers can set up large workshops, they can set up large showrooms over there for pushing sales. And really, when you ask a Maruti consumer, one of the biggest advantages of Maruti is its network, availability of spare parts, availability of service centers, and availability of dealers who they can walk into and try out their products.
Yeah.
So the strategy has been phenomenal, and hats off to Maruti that from last 40 years they have maintained a near 50% market share. It was much higher, still at 50% despite 20 plus auto companies in India to have maintained such a huge market share.
Yeah. I guess two points, I guess, just to note from what you said. The first is that in spite of the fact that Maruti hasn't seemingly made any significant EV investments, this partnership with Suzuki and by extension with Toyota, it would seemingly insulate them from the technological disruption caused by EVs, because if they're able to purchase cars at transparent transfer prices from their parent entity, even if it's for gasoline cars, presumably that arrangement would carry over to EVs or hydrogen cars or whatever it might be. Is that a fair expectation, or is the lack of investment in EVs a risk for them?
You answer one question for me, Varun. Who is leading the EV revolution in the world? Is Japan really a key player as far as EV is concerned?
I don't think so.
Exactly. Then how is Toyota and Suzuki going to be a key player when it comes to EVs within India? I think don't you think they are maybe a few years behind?
Yeah, I think Japanese manufacturers are betting heavily on hydrogen. Now, maybe they know something that nobody else knows, and if
They could put a rabbit out of the hat.
you never know, right? But if EVs are the future, then I think that's a major risk factor then for Maruti.
You got it right. I think it's one thing which I don't like about Maruti is the fact that they do not have a EV strategy. They have said that they will unveil that EV strategy, but when you compare it with M&M and Tata Motors, I think certainly they are lagging. But I think that you need to keep one aspect in mind, that the EV revolution for passenger vehicles in India is going to be much later than what we have seen in China, Europe and US. So we are, I think, many years behind adopting passenger vehicles in the EV space. So the first EVs will come into two-wheelers rather than the passenger vehicles in India, because we don't even have a robust EV ecosystem to charge the batteries.
I'm going to disagree with you on that, purely because if you look at the West as a model of transition from gasoline cars to EVs, then yes, that makes sense. But if you look at China, which is the real global leader in EVs, they didn't have this transition from gasoline to EV. Their homegrown EV companies, which is BYD and the others, I guess supported by CATL, for a lot of Chinese consumers, their first car was an EV. And if you look at government schemes like FAME and the kind of licensing and GST benefits being given to EVs, I think there is a fair expectation that a lot of the incremental consumers might find that their first car itself is an EV.
I'm all with you. I think if that happens, then I would like to stand corrected that if India's EV industry becomes as robust as what we have seen in China, then I think that's great news for Indian consumer as well as the Indian economy.
And the Indian environment. I mean,
Absolutely.
we're living in Mumbai, we're breathing the air. It would be lovely if it was a little bit cleaner.
Absolutely. So, I mean, as I said, the big risk factor in Maruti is the fact that they do not have a proper EV strategy. Maybe they'll unveil it in future. But having said that, I think they have worked very hard on new models, and the kind of slate which is there, I think is very impressive. And also one more important aspect is that gradually Maruti is becoming the export hub for Suzuki as well. I think they're focusing a lot on exports to other developing nations, And I was in Israel recently, and I saw a lot of a lot of Suzuki cars over there. I don't know whether they were imported from India or not, but they're making India as the manufacturing hub for exports as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's fantastic for the Indian economy and job creation. But I mean, I know they don't have an EV strategy, but as you can see, their historical performance from a sales and a revenue perspective, as well as from a margin perspective, and as we've mentioned, a market share perspective has been very strong.
That's right.
So
You can look at the figures, I think, but
Yeah.
they're fantastic over the last 15, 20 years, what they've done. Even recent performance has been exceptionally good. So I think it's great times for Maruti shareholders. And although it's not a recommendation, I think it's certainly a stock to watch.
All right. Well, I think that ends our segment on Maruti. Hopefully, our investors keep watching this stock. Okay. So I guess it's time to talk about my favorite automobile company of the moment, Mahindra and Mahindra. Full disclaimer: it's driven exclusively by the Thar, a car that I quite like. But it's a rising star in the Indian automobile industry. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, and it's another shining example of a homegrown auto company and the number of evolutions that it has gone to reach at this particular level, where it's a fabulous global auto company with in-house capability for design, manufacturing, sales across the board. I think hats off to them. They've been around for 77 years. How many companies can boast of being around for that long?
So when were they founded? 77 years is a long time. What are their origins? What's their origin story, I guess?
It's a pre-partition company founded by two Mahindra brothers and one Mr. Muhammad. So M&M stands for would earlier stood for Mahindra and Muhammad. But then Mr. Muhammad migrated to Pakistan, and then we have M&M, which is Mahindra and Mahindra. Two brothers set up Mahindra and Mahindra. And the key milestone for them was when they started assembling Jeeps in India. And the Jeep was one of the most popular cars. I think the army used it. A lot of the government also agencies used the Jeep. And that's when the journey for Mahindra and Mahindra began, when they started manufacturing Jeeps. It was under license from an American company, later owned by Chrysler. And thereafter, I think they felt that they should start developing their own brands and their own products. And I think the initial brands are not that well received. The quality was not up to expectations. It was a kind of a product which had a lot of issues in terms of a smooth functioning. But I would say M&M is one company which has invested very heavily in R&D, and they have grown the product quality, the product design, the kind of systems which are there by leaps and bounds over the last 15-20 years or so. And all of that credit goes to Anand Mahindra, who has been instrumental in making Mahindra and Mahindra what we call Atmanirbhar when it comes to their entire automobile business.
Yeah, I think they're very well positioned for the future as well, because I think Mahindra at least, or Mahindra Racing, is one of the founding members of Formula E, and has, I think, at least once been the runner-up in the Formula E championship.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So they're absolutely on top of this EV curve, and I'll say it again. Their recent car launches, the Thar in particular, that I quite love, is really shows that investment in quality. But really interesting. Another interesting point to note about how their investments in EV are paying off. They have their proprietary EV platform called the Iglo, on which they're planning on launching a number of EVs for the domestic market. But they've also signed agreements with Volkswagen to share this EV platform. So there's at least some hope that it will become an export powerhouse as well, because of the quality of their EV platform.
So Mahindra and Mahindra, when it came to EVs, they were ahead of the time. They bought into Reva, which was India's first electric vehicle company, way back in 2010.
Oh, wow.
So it was Anand Mahindra's vision almost 12 years ago that EV is going to be the way forward for Mahindra and Mahindra, for the auto industry. And they've been investing as much as possible into EV technologies, EV products, which is why now I think that they are very solidly positioned. In my assessment, they'll be one of the key players when we have more and more passenger vehicle EVs coming into play over here. And I think they've got the formula right when it comes to design, when it comes to experience. I think that's something which they have learned over the last 4 5 years. They have a golden touch when it comes to launching new products. As of now, I would say that they have long waiting lists for most of their new models. So that's something which we have to certainly give credit to the current management. A very well managed company, and recently the new CEO, he's taken over the company, and their focus is more on getting higher return on capital employed. See, typically the Mahindra Mahindra had too many new plants. They had done overseas acquisitions as well, and generally not enough attention was paid to return on capital, and that was one of the reasons why the company traded at a low price to earning multiple as well.
Yeah,
But that's changed.
yeah, and I think as you can see, the improvement in ROC, or return on capital employed, I'm sure that's reflected in the price performance of Mahindra.
Absolutely, I think the stock price has done really well, as you can see, over the last 3 4 years or so, and that's to do with the focus on ROC, focus on new models, capturing the imagination of their consumers, and that's played out very well for M&M. But there's another division of M&M, the tractor division, which I think also we should highlight over here, because the tractor division is the world's largest tractor manufacturer in the world, and they have made life easy for so many farmers. And I would say that they have been an unsung hero when it came to the green revolution in the country by providing low cost, good quality tractors to the Indian farmer, and that forever has changed the kind of income levels as well as the experience of the farmers, and where tractors in rural areas are not only used for agriculture but for transportation as well. And making a tractor in India is not as easy as it is perceived to be, because a tractor is used for many functions and not just plowing the fields.
Yeah, and you also need a high level of reliability, I'd imagine, in India with tractors, because the ability to access after sales service in comparison to, I guess, the US or Europe would be much lower.
Yes.
So hats off, I guess, really outstanding performance. I think, as you can see, even the recent results have been outstanding. Truly a homegrown giant.
Absolutely, and I think that they seem to be a bit ahead of the curve in terms of what is happening in the auto industry, especially on the EV side, and also the fact that the tractor business, although cyclical, is one of the best businesses in terms of return ratios, in terms of sales, in terms of product quality, after sales service. Network is really fantastic. I think they've gone very deep into the rural areas. And Varun, we spoke about in the earlier podcast about monsoon and its effect. I think if you want to buy one company which has got a lot of rural revenues coming through, it is Mahindra & Mahindra, because of its tractor, UV business, as well as I think a lot of its passenger vehicles and SUVs also go under rural areas.
All right. Well, that's definitely a stock to watch for the future. Maybe Anand Mahindra's vision will play out, and a couple of years from now we'll be hailing him as the next Elon Musk or India's Tesla.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
So let's discuss the third big stock on the agenda for today, a bellwether of the Indian automobile industry, Tata Motors. Really mixed bag of results recently and disappointing performance over the last few years. Any thoughts?
Varun, first of all, a confession. I've been in the market for many decades, and Tata Motors was listed even before perhaps I was born, but I have never really invested in Tata Motors. And the reason for that is that it's one company which has had very high degree of volatility in their earnings. So in the early part, they were purely a commercial vehicle manufacturing company, and that had its own cyclicality, because of which margins were always going up and down, and sales also was quite erratic. And then somewhere around the 2000s, the 2004, 1998 actually first, and the entire 2000s, they decided to venture into car production, passenger vehicle manufacturing, purely on account of the passion of its promoter, director, chairman, Ratan Tata, who was very passionate about getting Tata Motors into high class passenger vehicle segment. And they launched the Indica, which was, I would say, a decent success, but had many issues in terms of product quality.
I believe we owned an Indica at some point as well, and it was a really disappointing ownership experience, because we didn't really enjoy that car at all, did we?
No, really, and from the day we bought it, it had niggling problems which they really couldn't solve, and it was to make a lot of noise because of the diesel engine per se. So Tata Motors have been struggling to find the right product for a passenger vehicle, which they could, kind of make it a success. The Nano also came with a lot of fanfare, but that did not really succeed because clearly that aspiration aspect was where it was a liability. Because when you bought a Nano, you didn't really buy a car; it was a compromise. And that really didn't take off, which was quite surprising. And it's actually a case study as far as marketing and consumer
And
products are concerned.
I believe at the point when the Nano was launched, there was several problems with reliability, and I think there was a spate of news stories where the car was catching fire a lot, and I think that really hurt its brand image a lot, and maybe contributed to poor sales.
That's right. And generally, I think when it comes to quality, I think Tata Motors until now has been lagging, but last 3-4 years they have made great progress in terms of product quality, in terms of design, in terms of experience, and I think they have come on the scene now as far as passenger vehicles are concerned. They have certainly grown their market share last 2-3 years or so, and they are ahead of the curve when it comes to electric vehicles. All the EVs which they have launched, Nexon,
Yeah,
and on the other
I
platform.
think the prospective growth that Tata can then that Tata can experience from electric vehicles could be quite transformational. But before we go to its future potential, I'd love to discuss sort of the JLR acquisition, because it's one of those things that seems to have brought on a lot of debt on Tata Motors books, and perhaps it's paid off as well, because I think for several years after it was acquired, it did very well.
So first a story, actually a rumor, that Ratan Tata was very fond of the Jaguar car. In fact, some say he actually owned a Jaguar as well. And when Ford Motors put up Jaguar Land Rover for sale in 2008, the Tatas bid quite aggressively, and they thought they had got a prized asset. Maybe they overpaid, that's what analysts said at that point of time, because Jaguar Land Rover was really suffering at that point of time in terms of financial, in terms of capacity utilization. But they had 2-3 fabulous products, and in hindsight I think it was a very good acquisition. They have more than recovered the investment which they have made. It's grown in terms of contribution, volume, value, and the products have been absolute global hits. The Land Rover, the Discovery, the Jaguar XJ, XF and the XE models have all done really well. They expanded into China as well, and I think that although they may have overpaid at that point of time, it does appear to be a very strategic and sensible decision. Their thought process was that they could bring the Jaguar technology into the passenger vehicle manufacturing and production in India. I would say that that's been a mixed success. It's not really worked out for them. But right now I think there's a great deal of synergy on the EV side between JLR and Tata Motors e-vehicle platform. But having said that, Jaguar Land Rover is one company which has again had a high degree of volatility in their earnings, because there are just far too many moving parts. They supply to 3-4 continents. Some key markets are there: Europe, UK, US and China, which do not all perform in unison. So that creates an issue in terms of even accounting policies, in terms of provisioning for, be it for the forex exposure which they have, or the employee cost that keeps on fluctuating. So when, in fact, I've jokingly said that when you buy Tata Motors, then that's the only stock you are tracking, because there are so many variables involved over here. So from that point of view also, I've generally avoided buying Tata Motors stock per se. But the company has taken a lot of changes and strides in their progress the last 2-3 years. So maybe, who knows, from now I may look at it in different light.
Yeah, absolutely. But one thing that really strikes is that JLR is such a huge component of Tata Motors, and a lot of their sales are derived from the US, Europe and China. And with interest rates rising, with a slowdown in growth, I think Tata Motors' exposure to the global economy is, over the next few years, seems to me like a negative, because if it was global sales that was driving their growth and their volumes, I would not expect that to to be positive over the next few years given the global macroeconomic situation. So maybe something to be really concerned about with Tata Motors.
Yes, you made a very interesting point, Varun, because when we are looking at buying stocks in the auto industry, we want to play the Indian auto industry. We want a exposure to that vibrant, reasonably high growth segment within the economy. But when it comes to Tata Motors, what you're getting into is you're getting into a global play. So you could easily have bought Volkswagen or Mercedes or any of the global auto companies, and although we cannot buy as Indians, but the growth prospects of GL are linked to the global economy and global auto industry, and that's not a investment theme I want to play. I want to play the Indian auto industry, and that is something which Tata Motors doesn't really offer. Of course, they have a commercial vehicle division, but that's for another day. But on the whole, I think volatility in earnings, the fact that its contribution from the India business is limited and restricted, as well as the fact that there's a high degree of volatility in their earnings, doesn't make Tata Motors a very attractive investment bet.
Well, perhaps just to play the contrarian, maybe in the near future, Tata Motors India contribution could improve substantially, because I believe they have a leading position in the EV segment, and they're the largest EV manufacturer, and they have the highest number of EV sales in India. And I think a lot of that is because of the overall Tata ecosystem. Couple of really interesting synergies there. Charging networks and fast charging networks are one of the key drivers of EV sales growth, and the fact that Tata Power is also within the Tata portfolio of companies will certainly help setting up those EV charging stations. Tata AutoCAD, I believe, is another subsidiary of the Tata Group that manufactures batteries, and they have a partnership with China's third largest battery manufacturer, which is a leader in the lithium iron phosphate battery chemistry, which is perhaps better suited to India. So perhaps in the near term, given their improvement in car quality, they might become a leader in the EV space in India because of the unique advantages that they have being part of the Tata ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they are certainly a step ahead of the competition, and the entire consumer focus is on EVs. There are long waiting lists for all the EV products of Tata Motors. So maybe that will work out for them. But still, I think for many years, Jaguar Land Rover will be the key performing division for Tata Motors, and that's something which one needs to keep track of. But let me do one most positive thing about Tata Motors is its subsidiary company Tata Technologies, and that's coming out with an IPO, and that's one IPO which I'm keenly looking forward to, and I think I will apply certainly, because if you look at the software industry, the brightest spot is the software companies which are giving products and services to the auto industry, especially the EV shared mobility, and that's where Tata Technologies is focused. And given the kind of returns that other such companies in the listed space like Tata Elxsi and KPIT have given, I think we have very high expectations from Tata Technologies as well. And they are trying to monetize that particular asset, and which is very positive because it will go a long way in reducing their debt. Yeah. Management has targeted zero debt by FY25. Let's see how that plays out.
Yeah, and I think as you can see, their overall debt levels have been quite high for a very long time on account of particularly the JLR acquisition. Hopefully a successful Tata Technologies IPO gives Tata Motors a new boost and improves their financial performance.
Absolutely. So, but as I said, I think essentially you have a choice, and in the market I would prefer a homegrown domestic focused auto company or even an auto ancillary over Tata Motors. But there are many marquee investors in Tata Motors, and there's one very unique factor about Tata Motors is that it always disappoints the optimists and the pessimists, because it comes up with a quarterly number which is a disaster, and there are so many negatives in it, and people throw in the towel, and then the next quarter will be just phenomenal and eye-popping when it comes to global sales and the profits and the margins. And even those who have perhaps thrown in the towel, they sit up and look at the numbers. So that's the thing about Tata Motors, that it does pull a rabbit out of the bag from time to time, and hopefully I think if they're able to manage secular growth in earnings, then investors will certainly get interested in it. Tatas have been known to create a great deal of value in their companies. Tata Motors has been a bit of a laggard over the past several decades or so. Hopefully, it'll catch up. And one last thing is that Tata Motors has always got the highest attention and focus of the chairman of the Tata Group. So earlier it was Ratan Tata, and now even under Chandra, it has got a very high focus from the top Tata management team. So maybe that will certainly work out for Tata Motors shareholders at some point of time.
You never know. Tata Motors is definitely another one of our stocks to watch.
Absolutely.
And I think we'll enjoy watching how it plays out.
Fantastic.
So I think it's been a really interesting conversation with you today, Dad, about the Indian automobile space and particularly passenger vehicles, and how investors can make the right decisions in this space. And thank you so much for coming here and sharing your thoughts and wisdom and insight. And I'm sure that investors have something really important to take away from this discussion.
Yeah, I think it was a great pleasure for me as well. And I was going down memory lane because I've been investing in these auto companies ever since I entered the market. And they have been a great amount of wealth creators for us as well as a lot of investors. And as I said, I think a very informative session which we had today. I hope viewers enjoyed it.
Yeah, and even more important than our viewers enjoying this, I really hope that Anand Mahindra sees this podcast and sends me a Thar, because that's the car I want to own.
Yes.